How do I stay motivated to go to the gym? How do I stay consistent? Is a question that people ask me a lot. And I always answer by asking them, do you want the truth or do you want a sweet pill? Funny enough, most of them ask for the truth even though they know they won't like it. And I just tell them that the secret is that you have to understand how motivation works in order to be able to use it to your own advantage. Now, the majority of people consider motivation as this distant thing they don't have access or control over, something that has been chosen for them, but it's really not. Motivation is pretty simple to understand, and it is the greatest tool when you have control over it. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the habit of going to the gym. Motivation is the starting point of every one of your habits. And all of that comes from the same problem. It's the imbalance of your dopamine levels, leading you to feel the need for instant gratification and the incapacity to delay the reward. This is the reason why you don't feel motivated. And in this video, I'll explain why you feel unmotivated, the role of dopamine, and how to step by step bring your dopamine levels back to normal, enabling you to crack the code to motivation. You're unmotivated because your brain is impatient. Now, the problem is that motivation is a generalized system. People are not just unmotivated to go to the gym. Most of them also struggle with respecting their diet, maintaining consistent sleep, managing the stress, being organized, procrastination. Motivation is this drive. It's the mobilization of energy that your brain triggers to push you towards a certain behavior and action. Now, at the level of the brain, motivation is based mostly on the activity of dopamine. Quick neuroscience, even though there's a lot of stuff out there about dopamine, so you're probably aware of this. But dopamine acts as a neurotransmitter, meaning that it transports information from neuron to neuron, basically telling your brain to pursue this thing, whatever it is. It isn't the only thing that dopamine does. It's also responsible for a lot of other functions, movement, for example. But today we'll use the perspective of motivation and drive. This chemical signal doesn't make the difference between what is good for you and what is bad for you. The dopamine in your brain doesn't make the difference between the gym and the donut. It's just being triggered whenever your brain seeks a pleasurable outcome. And the issue isn't about the pleasure aspect, because if you can feel excitement and pleasure from activities like eating, playing video games, or hanging out with friends, your dopamine system is functioning. This tells us that the problem lies in the timing of your dopamine release, not the distribution of dopamine itself. In other words, the problem isn't that you're unmotivated. It's that your motivation isn't in the right place, if that makes sense. This is likely due to the fact that you've habituated your dopamine response to certain contexts, but not others. If you taught your brain to seek instant gratification, so essentially saying yes and giving your brain what it wants as quickly as possible to avoid the discomfort, then that's the major problem. Because by doing this, you're telling your brain, like a child, that it doesn't have to wait for the reward, making it increasingly impatient. And the reward you truly want, which is to get in shape, is a long way down the road. And your brain is just too impatient to invest its dopamine in that distant outcome that seems so out of reach. This is the reason why you can't sustain the motivation to go to the gym. You've primed your brain to seek for easy and quick rewards, making it very hard to sustain the long-term reward, the type of reward that fitness requires. The solution to that is to reverse engineer it and to teach your brain how to wait, how to be patient, how to engage in behaviors that don't offer immediate reward, and be okay with the discomfort that it triggers. Add a little pain if you want to feel good. The key to understand is that dopamine functions as a balance between pain and pleasure. When you have what you want, you feel pleasure. When you don't, you crave for it, wish for it, and experience discomfort, the pain of wanting something but not having it. Your brain has evolved to trigger this reaction because pain is the greatest motivator. And inducing this pain is its own way to motivate you to get this thing that you want. The problem arises when you can't tolerate the pain of wanting. When you constantly give in to immediate gratification, you inevitably diminish the value of larger long-term rewards because you're focused on the immediate smaller ones. But everything worth achieving takes time. And that is true especially when it comes to building your physique. More than that, up to a certain point, these quick rewards like food, social media, watching TV will leave you feeling stuck unmotivated and unable to reach your goals. As the more you consume fast and easy rewards, the more dopamine you use, which eventually leaves you depleted. Without enough dopamine in your system, you can trigger the motivation needed to pursue your goals. So it's not just that these fixes are making you impatient, they're also draining your dopamine reserves, leaving you unable to engage with long-term goals. That is why if you condition your brain to act as such, it will always choose the video game over the walk or the eating over the reading when you're bored. Just because video games and food provide more dopamine faster and demand less effort. This is also why if you maintain these unhealthy behaviors, it will be incredibly difficult to build new healthy habits and to stay away from these unhealthy ones, as your brain will always choose the path of least resistance. That is just the default mode. That's just the way it functions. Now we know the solution to all of that. If you want to tip the balance towards the side of pleasure, you need to intentionally add pain into the equation. Now, this doesn't mean hurting. This means adding difficult things that are going to feel uncomfortable and reducing the easy and accessible pleasure sources. Going to the gym is the perfect habit, as the goal is to destroy your muscles in the gym purposefully so that they have to grow bigger, stronger, and more healthy the next time. You have to train to force the adaptation, and when you're training, it doesn't feel good. But you're doing this, you're sacrificing what you have in the moment, in the present moment, for your future self. And that's what's most powerful about exercising. You know you're damaging your body in the moment for it to improve, upgrade, and ameliorate over time. So if you feel unmotivated, stuck, and like things aren't bringing you that much joy in your life, you need to add discomfort to your lifestyle. Planned and purposeful discomfort. Replace the cheap dopamine with hard-earned dopamine. That's how you bring back pleasure and enjoyment in your lifestyle and reach your dream physique in the long run. Self-binding is the key. The best part to all of that is that it's within reach. I've been through it. My clients have been through it. It isn't complex to do. You can rebalance your dopamine levels and adopt the habit of going to the gym as a lifestyle in a matter of weeks. And that's exactly why I've created Fitness Autonomy in the first place, to give you all the tools you need, whether it's about exercise, nutrition, and motivation in this journey. And if you want more information, check the link in the description. So if you want that, if you want to rebalance your lifestyle, you need to start imposing yourself rules to be able to reduce the dopamine that's being released from cheap sources and increase the one that you get from hard-earned sources. And here's how to do it step by step. Step 1 is to reduce the instant gratification episodes. The first and honestly hardest step is to reduce the sources and the frequency that you're getting from the cheap dopamine sources that you're currently cultivating. Because the reality is that you need to create more room and you need to free up enough dopamine to establish the healthy habits that you want to adopt. Now, this section is what many people refer to as a dopamine detox or a fast, but as you can see, it's just one piece of the puzzle. So start by identifying your main sources of cheap dopamine, which are usually video games, social media, consuming content, gambling, sugary foods, stimulants. If several of these are present in your life right now, don't try to eliminate them all at once. It's going to be counterproductive as it will just cost your brain too much. Because if you remove all your sources of cheap dopamine and try to replace them with something challenging like going to the gym, which doesn't yet trigger enough dopamine because it hasn't been encoded as something rewarding by your brain will rebel to that. And that's when you experience cravings, temptations, and a lot of frustration. Now just add to that a deep sense of unmotivation because no dopamine is being released anymore. And you have the perfect storm most people face when trying to overhaul their lifestyle all at once. The key is not to get rid of everything, but to intentionally reduce your engagement with the main sources of cheap dopamine. This way you can conserve enough dopamine to tackle the challenging tasks of going to the gym, for example. Now, most people are aware of the main problems in their lives. If you're overweight and struggle with food intake, then food is likely to be the main cheap source of dopamine, and that's where you need to focus. If your main issue is procrastinating and binging Netflix shows after work, then reducing that behavior should be your first priority. Step 2 accept the state of want. Reducing the amount of dopamine that you get from cheap sources will inevitably trigger an unpleasant feeling. You will feel uneasy, you will experience discomfort, and you will feel a profound sense of wanting the things that you're not getting. This is to be expected. It's actually a good sign because it means that your brain is craving a dopamine boost and you're not giving it. You're keeping your dopamine to reinvest it in more meaningful goals. Like, again, building your physique, going to the gym, prepping your meals. Now, self-binding and imposing yourself rules is the only way to achieve this. As your brain, primitive as it is, will always try to convince you to return to easy and quick gratification. Remember, that's the default mode. You need to set boundaries and use them to teach your brain how to become patient, how to handle not getting what it wants in the moment so that you can reach your long-term goals later. The negative feeling is just a normal part of the process. It won't harm you. And it doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong either. Just as comfort fills our lives, discomfort should be an equally important part to it. You must distinguish between what is meaningful for you and what feels good, because this is far from being the same thing. I bet you that Batman doesn't experience much pleasure fighting in the streets of Gotham City, but it sure looks damn admirable to me. In a world of extreme accessibility, it is your responsibility to set your own limits and restrict this accessibility whenever it's blocking you from reaching your objectives. That said, the intensity of the negative reaction will be proportional to the level of stimulation you usually get from the experience. So if you're really used to binge these TV shows, this won't be easy again, but this is going to be very meaningful. 3 is to find healthy coping mechanisms. At some point, you'll start to realize that there are only a handful of habits that are preventing you from reaching your fitness goals. By becoming aware of them, which is what you do in step 1, you'll be able to disengage from these unhealthy patterns, which is what you do in step 2. But what you'll come to find is that these unhealthy habits are essentially ways to cope with life's stressors, and ease and boredom. And while having coping mechanisms is necessary, the key is to make them work for you instead of against you. Exercise is the perfect example. It helps you release the tension, forget about the anxiety for a minute, and it's good for your health and longevity. Again, I highly recommend weightlifting, and if you don't know where to start, feel free to download my ebook. Again, link in the description. Now, to replace those unhealthy habits you're trying to break, we need to swap them with healthier alternatives that allow you to disconnect from life for a moment. You can replace eating with reading. You can replace smoking with running. You can replace video games with cooking. And you can replace shopping with going to the museum. I don't know. The key is sustainability. These habits need to help you, or at the very least, not harm your health and happiness in the long run. Of course, these habits are going to be harder to build since they aren't as immediately gratifying. But if you build them properly, they can gradually transform your daily life for the better. Now, again, don't try to implement this all at once, or you'll feel overwhelmed by the whole process, which makes it not durable, which is the opposite of what we want. Using your dopamine to engage in meaningful activities. By following the previous steps, you'll free up enough dopamine to engage in the meaningful activities that will actually lead you to your goals. This doesn't mean that you'll feel excessively motivated, but it does mean that you'll have enough dopamine to stay consistent, and that's the most important thing. Now it's about having a clear goal and sticking to it using self-discipline. And I made a whole other video about self-discipline, again, description. You want to channel your focus and your energy in one direction. And if your goal is to make going to the gym a habit, which it should be, then your priority is ensuring this happens consistently. The key is to make a commitment. A promise to yourself to engage in the activity you set out to do and to know why you're doing it. The motivation you're seeking, the excitement and joy that you get from a habit is something that develops over time with those types of slow dopamine sources. More than that, it's just not something that's constant. I've been training 5 to 6 days per week for years, and sometimes I feel that motivation and that drive, but sometimes I don't. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need to wait to be 100% motivated to engage, because That's just unrealistic. Your brain will always seek escapes. Now, as always, I hope this helps. Trust the process.